we've been through a pretty great morning with lots of big ideas and great panels and detailed discussion between panelists. For this session, I really hope that Scott and I are harassed throughout the entire session with questions, that we are inundated with what you're trying to figure out with server-to-server header bidding, and specifically pre-bid server. Definitely want it to be interactive. We'll start randomly calling on people or jumping over chairs if we need to. It's also after lunch and everything, so the jet lag is setting in really great right now for both of us. I'm from the West Coast, and it is especially delightful right now. So thank you again for coming and learning more about pre-bid server. We talked in the panel a little bit about the why behind what we were doing here. We wanted to make sure that we had a server-to-server header bidding solution that was in market that solved the needs of better user experience in header bidding, but maintained some of the benefits that we got with Prebid.js, specifically that it was trusted, that we had a lot of demand partners supporting it. Prebid right now, Prebid.js, has over 60 different demand partners integrated with it, and getting 60 different ad tech companies to do something in the same way is, as you know, an interesting proposition. But we've managed to do that, and now we're looking at what we can do on the server-side space. So Prebid server is launched. It is free for publishers. It does not require an AppNexus contract that has us participating in the exchange. So anybody can go and use it. The idea there really is that we want to make sure that header bidding itself remains open, remains transparent, and that you can get a lot of the benefits that you've had with header bidding, but with server-to-server kind of layered in on top of it. We can afford to do that because we have a lot of the shared infrastructure in place already that handles these types of auctions, and we work with a very large number of publishers today, so there isn't a whole lot of incremental demand there. We're also open sourcing the code to show transparency into what the auction is doing, and we think that other partners will probably go and host their own instances, which is great because at that point we still have the same levels of transparency. With server-to-server, having been thinking about this with Scott for a year or more, there's been a lot of potential ways that we could have done this. We could have done what is just basically normal RTB and forced supply-side partners to integrate as effectively DSPs, but maybe with direct clearing or not, or are there double ad quality controls? It became pretty clear, though, that with the market where it is today, that a transparent proxy service was really going to be the way to go. So with server-to-server header bidding in general, the idea is that we're taking all of the client-side work that's happening on the page and just shoving it right into a server so that the user's browser doesn't have to do all the work itself, and that a server-side component can make all those connections. And ideally, then you have more demand partners or a smaller timeout, and you can end up with better performance. The goal for us really then is to make sure that that work happens, but it doesn't do any logic. It basically is just taking bids from these different demand partners, bringing it to the page, and Prebid.js itself does what it normally does and facilitates the communication with the ad server. So by using this framework, we get the advantages of Prebid.js itself with its demand partner ecosystem, with its transparency on the page, with how effective it is at working with DFP, and then we also get the benefits of server-to-server header bidding. So with that very brief introduction, kind of, are there any burning questions before Scott starts making some stuff up for me? And I'll buy a beer for the first person who asks a question at happy hour. Yes. That was really easy.
That's easy. When you talk about demand, and so in my head, it's a bit difficult to see demand like a DSP and an SSP. But I think my voice is loud enough. So when you talk about demand, getting demand in, can you sometimes differentiate between an SSP or DSP or maybe buyer and advertiser even, because you're talking about a chain, and this might help us understand better how you are connecting the ecosystem to the pre-bid.
Yeah. So it's something that we call people that integrate through pre-bid or other header bidding solutions, we call them demand partners, which is a semi-confusing term because most of them are supply-side focused networks. or SSPs, or exchanges, or some other supply-side focused component. We are seeing a few DSPs consider going directly. If you think about header bidding and its history, companies like Criteo and Amazon have been effectively doing header bidding since day one. It's just now that lots of other people are doing it, and we're starting to see that proliferation. We think that demand partners that are working directly with publishers need to have certain standards in place about what they can do for the publisher themselves. So things like effective creative controls, so that you're not just showing a bunch of ads that don't have any logic or restrictions around them. We think that's an important characteristic that demand partners for header bidding should have. There are a few other things. Demand partners, in many cases, should prefer to go through an exchange or an SSP due to the actual benefits of that, like QPS controls and other controls around what impressions are actually sent to them. So given that, right now with Prebid.js, it's relatively open. With Prebid Server, we're focusing on the quality SSPs and high-value networks as our first integration partners. But when a publisher, in my mind, looks at header bidding, server-to-server or client-side, demand partners should be considered people that you would traditionally work with, just done through header bidding. Yeah?
Server side, but the rest we still have to go client side, and we have to do both.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, AppNexus customer, ad server customer. So when we look at the partners that we're working with, we do have a contract that we have signed for the AppNexus hosted version of this code. The code itself will have the actual technical capabilities to work with these other supply-side partners. But I think if somebody else goes and hosts their own, they'll need to have those relationships as well. It's a matter of trust between different demand partners. Trust between demand partners that are also hosting wrappers is another important reason why we did the open source version. The black box wrapper scenario is an incredibly dangerous one, long term. Not like I think that people that are doing it are biasing us right now. I don't think that's happening. But you can see how long-term that becomes another dangerous choke point, effectively, preventing more unified auctions, or fair and unbiased unified auctions. From a hybrid perspective, long-term, as to what demand partners are going to go server-side and what demand partners are going to stay on the page, I am actually a little skeptical of the idea that in a year or so, we'll have 50 demand partners integrated server-side, and then your top 5 or so integrated client-side. I don't actually think that's going to be the case. I think that really what we're going to see is fewer demand partners, maybe than what people work with today, but specialized demand partners, quality demand partners that are primarily integrated server-side. So obviously, I'm going to say that from the AppNexus perspective, because I think that we're going to be one of those. But that's sort of the trends that we're seeing happen. So hopefully we don't get into a situation where you are having to deal with 50 networks or so, and the operational overhead of having to do that will be brutal. But if we can get everything server-side, or the things that matter server-side, then especially with the ad server story, it gets very attractive. Scott, you have the next one?
Sure.
Depending on what it is. Yeah.
Don't you lose the benefit of the networks and the cookie? Don't you lose the benefit of the networks and the cookie when it's a browser call compared to a server call?
Yep, I can take that one. Good timing. So in theory, yes, right? The demand partners need to know who that user is, and so there needs to be some way for them to speak the same language as Prebid.js. So what we're doing is establishing a user sync process with each of the demand partners that happens in real time. So on the first impression for a user that nobody has ever seen, they've just cleared their cookies, Prebid server will actually set a cookie and drop the user sync pixels for the demand partners. And so on the next impression, or even further down on the page, depending upon how it's set up, the call to the server will have the necessary IDs the IDs are also being stored in a cookie on the browser. And so there's no server-side lookups that have to happen. There's no out of sync. Everything is stored encrypted in the user's cookie that goes to Prebid server on the request. And so everything is done immediately as soon as that request comes back and the pixels get fired.
So one of the major concerns there was not wanting to have other demand partners forcing cookie syncing through typical pixel queues with the wrapper itself. And if we can have the wrapper have its own cookie that uses effectively native user IDs for each of these different platforms, we solve a lot of issues with that.
And if we tie that back to what we heard earlier around identity and single IDs, that will parallel into Prebid as well. And any demand partner that's using the same ID, as soon as Prebid server has an ID, a user, every demand partner working in that coalition will automatically have one. So you don't even need user syncing.
All right, next question. I understand that I talk fast. I do appreciate that we've answered all of your questions about Prebid server without having seen the code yet. You should check out the code. It is on GitHub right now, and we do have the hosted version of it at prebid.adnxs.com. Which ties back to the broader coalition announcement that Scott mentioned. Signups will be open very shortly. Once you sign up, and again, it's easy to sign up, you get your Prebid server ID. That ID goes into your Prebid.js config, and then the other work that you have to do is basically tell Prebid.js which adapters of the ones that are supported you want to go server-side. And so it's not really a whole lot of lift to change an existing Prebid.js setup to be server-to-server enabled. We did want to make it as easy as possible. Though, again, you do have to sign up and get that account ID. That helps us make sure that we don't see terrible bad actors behaving on this platform.
Okay. And in the future, the idea is that we'll be able to take that config that today lives on the page for each adapter, and for any server-side adapter, bring it into the server. So in the UI that you'll log into, you'll actually have a set of configs that you can set up. And on the page, you simply identify, these are the configs that I want to use. And on the server, it will say, here are the specific attributes of the call to each demand partner. So if and when you do need to make changes or tweaks, you don't have to change your tag. You can change it on the server.
So I had a question on match rates. So assuming you do move someone server-side, until the universal ID is in place, what sort of match rate would you expect?
So you're going to see a drop, basically, the first time that you implement this and move somebody from client-side to server-side, if you already have that relationship with them, because they're going from no tag on page to, certainly in the early days, to one where there does have to be that query for that person's user ID. But I think that that'll pretty quickly diminish, especially as we get broader adoption of Prebid server. Header bidding in general is still in pretty early stages, and server-to-server especially so. We've seen massive industry press around server-to-server, but in terms of viable in-market solutions, Prebid server is definitely one of the first, and the first at scale, I would say. That doesn't have severe gating around it. So I think that there's going to be a lot of experimentation that goes on, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about that as we start to go through it. There might be some ups and downs, but there will be some downs.
Okay, sorry. Are you providing any reporting or monitoring tools? And if so, is it part of the free service, or is it extra?
Yeah. So one of the great things about Prebid server is, as part of its transparent nature, it shoves as much information as it can back to Prebid.js. Prebid.js has a lot of analytics hooks built in, and we're starting to see some companies build analytics solutions specifically for header bidding. We've had the default Google Analytics option for a while. It would be relatively straightforward for a publisher to build their own analytics plugin to hook that data directly into their own data pipeline, which would be, I think, rather powerful. So you'll be able to take advantage of analytics from Prebid.js, including server-to-server analytics, and get kind of a unified view there. We are also exposing some very basic metrics, just to be able to see that things are working and so forth. But it's not designed to be an analytics solution as well. It's really kind of a component that's part of Prebid, I think.
Does the open source version comes with the connection to the third-party platforms, or do we have to negotiate our own connection?
So the code is there. The code to connect to the demand partners is there. But the negotiations that we've had with these other partners is for the hosted version that we have. So as somebody that wants to go and potentially do this, I would expect that those demand partners want to have that relationship directly with the entity that's hosting Prebid server as well. I think that you can take open source code and say you're using open source code, but you still need to have legal processes in place to make sure that as you're doing that, that you're not modifying it and biasing somebody terribly or other things like that. All the legal agreements are really focused around transparency, making sure that things aren't biased one way or the other, providing hooks in place for publishers to do basic things, making sure that data isn't shared between demand partners. Like the last thing that you want is somebody to just watch somebody else's bid stream and adjust their bidding habits. So a lot of it is around continuing to make sure that header bidding is a fair and level playing field, even in a world where potentially we could start to see these bottlenecks.
So right over there.
I know you also have another solution which you call Postbid, and in that solution there's something that I very much like, where you also call addicts with the highest second price bid you've had so far as a floor, and then that way you effectively get Google to bid as well. If they get a higher price, then you go with them. If they don't, then you go back to the highest bid you've had so far. What's the future of your post-bid solution, and how can we get Google to participate in pre-bid server to server?
All you.
I think publishers have a lot of weight in the industry, and I think publishers are the ones that are leading that conversation in particular. I would love Google to participate in pre-bid server. We welcome all demand partners that we think can benefit publishers. Regarding post-bid, so post-bid right now is certainly a well-supported feature in pre-bid. I'm not entirely sure of the interplay of pre-bid server and post-bid, though, so that's something that we can follow up with.
Can you elaborate more on pre-bid, mid-bid, and post-bid? For some people it's new, so can you tell me what?
It is recorded, okay. Can you tell us a bit more about the differences between pre-bid, mid-bid, and post-bid?
So pre-bid and post-bid are kind of two different modes that you can run header bidding in. Pre-bid is probably the flow that is very typical header bidding that everybody thinks about, where you're putting prices in and activating the line items. Post-bid is, in some ways, an easier way to get started that requires fewer changes, but it basically, as Eugene was saying, acts more as a floor in, with other sources. Prebid.org has a lot of docs on that, though. So rather than me try to explain it and probably, honestly, get it wrong and lead you astray, I would say take a look at that. All right, yeah. Sorry, I thought I saw you raise your hand. So we have time for probably 2 more questions. I'm not hearing a couple that I would have expected, like creative audit or creative quality controls. One of the potential benefits around server-to-server header bidding is that you could potentially do more with creatives. This kind of gets in that situation of a wrapper developing more like an ad server over time. This is specifically something that we're not doing right now. That's kind of a separate problem than the user experience concerns. And I think that with creative controls, that's one reason to choose the demand partners that you're working with carefully to make sure that you can work with partners that allow you to set that up appropriately. Flooring, as you might hear in the next session, is another area where traditionally we've managed everything independently in each different SSP. That seems to make less sense today in the header bidding world. So probably something that you want to think about managing elsewhere rather than with a primary SSP that formerly was at the top of the waterfall. So we don't support flooring in Prebid Server, just like with Prebid.js. It really is designed to be that pure, transparent pass-through. So hopefully demand partners won't suffer at all, and it shouldn't matter if somebody wants to go server-side or client-side. That shouldn't be a debate in the industry. So we're seeing what we can do on that side. All right, well, if there are no final questions, Michael Richardson, Scott Menzer, it's been fantastic to talk with all of you. Feel free to hit us up after the breakouts. And we're happy to talk more. Prebid.adnxs.com. There's documentation up there. Sign-up forms will be live soon. You can get started very easily. The GitHub repo for Prebid is very active with both Prebid.js and Prebid Server now, and actually the website at prebid.org. Prebid.org itself has a lot of resources, including a new, easier-to-use navigation that actually makes it very easy to find a lot of the AddOps setup and a lot of the reasoning behind how we do certain things and why. And I hope that we can all work within the ecosystem together. So, thank you very much. Thank you.